Good afternoon, everyone. And I don't know who's yelling back there, but I love that. So you just keep that coming. And in my state, my inaugural address, I declared throughout New Mexico, and I needed to do it for every place in the country, that the podiums should be shorter. Right? I am, in fact, the shortest governor in the country. I was the shortest member of Congress. And I make up for all of those aspects by being incredibly long-winded. So I don't know why they would have me come in the afternoon. But I do want to say thank you for just giving me this opportunity. And as I start, I hope, navigating through a variety of issues, this is an organization that makes a difference, not just for Democrats with an agenda to get things done for the people who need us, but to create an environment where you're thinking about the newest efforts that you can start to demonstrate in your state. So I want to thank you all very much for those efforts and give you a sense about how they're taking shape in my state. Now, Winnie talked a little bit about the border. So, of course, I'm one of the very few handful border state governors who don't get to engage in immigration policy. And on the one hand, I'm actually going to say, okay, Trump administration, you are accurate about one thing. And of all the stuff they're working on, I do think it's only one thing. Immigration is a federal issue. They are right about that, which makes this even more challenging and difficult because they have abdicated in every context their responsibility in day-to-day immigration enforcement, immigration support, and are creating the kinds of humanitarian crises that governors like me are now dealing with at the border with absolutely no productive federal support. And I'm taking advantage of my time here in Washington by going to the Department of Homeland Security and re-explaining to them that they must do their job. So I want to give you a couple of highlights. One, my state was one of the states when this administration said, look, we'd like to militarize the border. They were very clear about that. They weren't interested in some security leveraging. They weren't interested in looking at whether or not we could enhance security using state-of-the-art efforts with drones and cameras in areas where we know we have high risk. They weren't interested in putting personnel at ports of entry, make sure that our trade was working responsibly, but also looking for nefarious activity, which is where most of that occurs in border states, is at ports of entry. It's also where you should present, right, if you're an asylum seeker. But what they wanted is the presence of a military operation to build an agenda, not just potentially in the country, but an agenda for Congress to support their national declaration of an emergency. Now, that happened before I got to be governor of a great border state. All right, so I've been to the border many times. I've seen many of these operations from the nonprofit side, and I've been to at least 6 detention sites between California and all the way through to Texas. So I wanted to see what my 100 men and women, who are incredible people, are doing at the border in New Mexico. All right, so within the first 3 weeks of being sworn into office, I visit the border, and it's before the surge of asylum seekers. Clear to me that they're not doing any of the work, even though they're incredible professionals, that would make a difference along the border. And in fact, there was no information about any impact they had on nefarious activity, screening, security operations, any of it. What they were doing is helping with maintenance of vehicles, which is important, except they weren't using any of those vehicles. And the best demonstration I could get from incredible, I don't blame the Guard, but just in terms of what they were doing, was that we're good economic development for these local communities because we're living here now and present. Well, the last time I checked, A, we don't use the National Guards in our states for economic development, and 2, I don't think we should be militarizing the border. So I would thank you. So first governor to pull back troops after they were asked for by the president, not going to engage in militarizing the border. But like every debate, including the debate about gun violence, when we message evidence-based strategies that reduce gun violence and reduce risk from background checks to extreme risk protection orders, people buy guns. The NRA creates messaging that creates more risk. We try to navigate that productively and responsibly. Well, the same thing is happening at the border. So every time the federal government and the Trump administration says, we're building a wall and we're closing the border, two things happen. Additional panic about getting to the United States occurs, and it's also a message to nefarious activity that they have access points that have increased as well. Both are occurring. So for a let's deal with crime federal administration, they're doing less on that front for border states than they've ever done, any administration, and they're creating panic at the border. So we do, in fact, have a humanitarian crisis, and the federal government, I know that you will be shocked, and I think you probably already know this, right? They have 2,000 positions that Congress has paid for that they will not fill. Many of those positions belong in Customs and Border Patrol and ICE agents in my state along the border where I need them. The customary aspect is to take asylum seekers at the ports of entry. They will not do that. And even if they let a few folks in, it's automatic detention if that's where you're coming, which means we then re-engage in potential family separation depending upon what's going on at any of these shelters or detention sites. So the better way, you can't get through, and now 100% of the time, it wasn't 100%, now 100% of the time, instead of the Custom and Border Patrol agents receiving asylum seekers, doing the work that they're supposed to do to screen them for a multitude of issues, including getting them ready to get to a sponsor family. And when they do that, they then give them to ICE. Those are the internal agents and enforcement. And then ICE is responsible for moving a population into sponsor family states and communities. Instead, and they have transportation to do that. And you should also know, asylum seekers, their sponsor families pay for the travel costs. So this whole notion that public entities or states like mine are paying for that is false. It's a false narrative by the federal government. But now what's happening as hundreds every single day are coming across, ICE does not have any engagement with them, which means, and they're the ones that are trained to help solve some of the transportation issues and do the secondary screening. The Customs and Border Patrol agents get as many as they can into as many vehicles as they can, and they're taking them to tiny communities in states like mine. And to put that in perspective, 6,000 asylum seekers have now been placed in a variety of places in New Mexico on their way someplace else, and in communities at the border, like a place called Deming in New Mexico. That can be as high on any given day between 5 and 10% of the total population of that community. And so it does two things in my state. Shows that Americans and New Mexicans are incredible people who can lift up and respond irrespective of the challenges, and it also creates real risk about how people feel, about what those responses are, about how we get New Mexicans and Americans to understand that for generations, nonprofit organizations, largely faith-based, have been doing this work with Homeland Security and Border Patrol and ICE productively. And the federal government is interrupting that on purpose to create this issue, to create dysfunction, to sow hate. My state's not going to allow that to happen. We're the only state that I'm aware of currently that's shoring up these nonprofits, that's providing crisis grants in absence of federal government support 2 local communities to defray their costs. We've actually used a state bus and driver to help move folks where they go. They need to get to bigger airports. So this is a plea, actually, after you leave here, write your favorite airline and tell them I'm going to need them in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and El Paso, Texas, because that's a big challenge for a rural state, is that they need to get to airports with sufficient flights to get them where they're going. So what we need is a message that looks like this based on practicing this work in my state. 1, this is not a national emergency related to security at the border. Seen it with my own eyes. I'm going back there Friday. I'll be serving meals. I'll be talking to beleaguered, tired, hungry women and their toddlers. They need a quick health care screen. They have colds. And if we don't treat those colds, they lose their lives because they're 3. And they've been traveling 1,000 miles. They're dehydrated. By the time they get to the border, they have absolutely nothing left, including shoes. This is a crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. This country, the federal government, should be spending real money to stop the surge in a productive, fair, meaningful way, meeting the constitutional requirements for asylum seekers, supporting states like mine, and then they absolutely should do the security around the border, because I'm doing that now too in my state, which means my state police are responding. So we can do it. We are doing it. We will continue to lead in the absence of a federal government, but I will continue to fight. And while all of that is going on, creating that tension, you might be shocked to learn that New Mexico is on the move. And in fact, and I hate to use this, but I'm going to anyway because it's fire season, we're on fire. All right, in a good way. We are on fire. So these distractions in terms of messaging, not distractions on the ground, cannot allow leaders like you or leaders like me from not doing the work that makes a difference. How many of you knew that in January, New Mexico was on the last place on any list? Public health, education, social determinants, poverty, hunger, the economy. You name a list. If it was a good one, we were at the bottom of that list. Guess where we are today? We're one of the states that moved minimum wage. It's now going to be $12 an hour. It's going to go $1 a year. Although in state government, it's going to happen all at once because I'm a very impatient, short, 60-year-old woman. And that must happen right now. 2, we are the 3rd largest oil and gas producer in the country. At the same time, we are now leading the country in pivoting to renewable energy with the most aggressive renewable portfolio. We passed a law that says we will be carbon-free by 2045, including rural electric co-ops with the first ever in the country equity fund that goes directly to workers who are impacted in the fossil fuel industry. And about, 3 weeks after that bill was signed into law, we said we would beat that by 5 years. So instead of 2045, it's 2040 because you got to keep moving. Number 1 in the country. We have now diversified our economies in ways they said would take years. We've been announcing hundreds of jobs every week, including New Mexico will be the first country and the first place on the globe to have commercial space flight occur. We're the only place in the world that's got an inland spaceport with 3 companies located and a huge announcement about Virgin Galactic. And in fact, the very first photo taken from space showing our big, beautiful world was taken from New Mexico in 1947. This is where stuff is happening on the ground. It's amazing. And hemp, we're the first state to do hemp growing research and manufacturing. From soup to nuts, it's all occurring, announcing companies that are already on the ground, hiring hundreds of New Mexicans. We've decided that instead of 50th in public education, we're going to go for a moonshot. We've decided that every other state should get out of our way. We'll be number one in the country, single large set of investments. New Mexico, last legislative session, from teacher raises to extended days during the summer to make sure we don't lose kids between those classes, with serious mentoring and day-to-day support, including community schools, as a statewide reform so that we're lifting up every single family, and that our at-risk students and our bilingual language learners will get the attention they deserve. My golly, New Mexico, Spanish is our official language. How is it that Spanish speakers struggle in New Mexico? Outrageous. No more. Gone. Done. And you can't do it unless you have early childhood education. We're going to get to universal early childhood education. We said we wanted $285 million in 5 years. Well, I just said I was impatient. Let's see if we can't get to universal. Dominic, I want it in 3 years. We're on our way. We got tens of millions. We're creating one of the first of its kind, a department moving over every single, not just the educational part, but making sure, and I want folks to hear this quick story, and I know that I'm out of time. It's now blinking at me. I don't know what happens when that happens. I'm a little nervous. But I told this story a ton while I was testifying in our legislature about why we needed early childhood education. If you want to change the paradigm in a state that's long been plagued by poverty and loses our kids in any number of ways, then you better be serious that that's a priority, and we better invest not just in early childhood education, although it's pivotal, but be clear, right, that prenatal to grave, we have to have a system of support and care for our families, focusing on children. Now, I've got a 30, I think she's 33. I don't think she likes it when I tell people how old she is. And she has a almost 4-year-old and a 7-month-old. And she's in a great situation. I mean, she has me as a mom. That's good. She might argue that point, actually. She lives near me and other family members. She's got a husband who's supportive and can assist in the day-to-day, both working, so part of a breadwinner, and help with the kids. And they make sufficient income that they can pay privately for both child care and early childhood education, even though it's a huge struggle in their situation. So they're already in a position that too many New Mexicans envy and aren't finding themselves today. And then she told me this story, and I'm appalled. So my daughter gets up in the morning. This will sound familiar to every parent in the room. Gets up an hour earlier than you want to because you got to get those kids up, ready, and packed for school. Only that's not what happens. She takes them to childcare. And they both go to the same place, which took months of waiting and navigating and many late nights of worrying about whether that was ever going to happen or they were going to have two different places. Now this, because both kids go, is not an education aspect. It's child care assistance, very important. And then she goes to work. She's at work for 2 hours, and then she must travel all the way across town to pick up the 3, now almost 4-year-old. Then they have to go, and they miss snacks, they miss lunch, they miss naps. Now they got to go across town to a early childhood education center. Then my daughter drives back to work. She's at work for 2 hours, and she has to drive across town again, pick up the 4-year-old. Now she's missed the second nap and the snack. She's got to figure that out and drive back to childcare. Then she has to drive back to work because she's missed work. She has to stay into the next shift at work, and then her husband picks up both those kids and is on his own instead of participating like a family. 5 days a week with no end in sight. Kindergarten's still a year away, and even then it'll be more complicated because we're one of those states where it's not automatic that you're going to get, it's coming, full-day kindergarten. How can we be doing this as a country and as a society to our children and to our families? And I just gave you the best case scenario in my state. And so that is a thing of the past. Fixed, resolved, universal early childhood education, full day, wherever you need it, in whatever context, and we're small enough that we can get that done in a minute. So my message to you today, and I didn't hit every single thing we got done in this session. We also took care of working families and enhanced that tax credit. We did so many progressive things that will make a difference over generations of New Mexicans while we were dealing with public safety, humanitarian crisis, and other issues. We also did pass all those gun safety laws. And so the point is this: these are not mutually exclusive, and we must stand up and show by example that we can respond and protect ourselves from a federal government that is unwilling to do its job, and it's doing that on purpose, and you can make a difference in the lives of our day-to-day citizens, and they expect both, not one or the other. And in New Mexico, they're getting it. And I hope with your help, that's going to be the experience with every Democratic leader in every state in the nation. I thank you very much for your support. I thank you for this afternoon, and I really appreciate your attention and time. Thank you.